I request those of you who can switch on your video would can do so, because anyway this online exchange is a bit weird still after all of these years. Uh, so this is a, uh webinar series that we do from IDEAS, which is the Office of Interdisciplinary Studies at Jindal Global University. We have combined this today with another of our initiatives, which is called Molding Methods, where we talk around the entire question of methods and in the social sciences, where we take an issue and then how to come at it from different disciplinary vantage points. So we are trying to do that mix. So today we have with us Professor Amit Basole, who's a professor in economics and head of Center for Sustainable Employment in Ajim Premji University, Bangalore. He is also the lead author of The State of Working in India, which started in around 2018, I think, and has been a regular publication from the center and the university. He has previously taught in Bucknell University and the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And also when we were thinking about interdisciplinarity, question of methods and so on, Amit is a excellent candidate for that, because of his earlier training and work and PhD in neuroscience earlier, and then in a PhD in economics. And now from there, he has moved on to, if I can say, move on to another domain of where he does these podcasts and series on Bhakti and on Urdu ghazals. So, so we wanted all of it, but today we will keep it a bit specific, which is on the report and the vantage point of these State of Working in India reports, which have also have had, other than the report itself, there are also working paper series that are associated with it, which come from different disciplinary vantage points. And taking that as a vantage point, the report is, of course, freely available in the website. But taking that as a vantage point, then to think about the entire question of methodologies around data, around qualitative methods, and so on. So we've kept it slightly a bit vague, and we will let the floor for Amit now. And after that, we will have Dr. Abhishek Konar, who is an associate professor in Jindal Global Law School. He will do a few minutes of discussion around that, and then we will open the floor. So Amit, we can begin. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Nan, for the invitation and for the kind introduction. आज तो शायरी नहीं होगी फिर किसी दिन. Today's data mostly. So I was wondering what to talk about, given the mixed audience and so on. And I thought perhaps, one nice thing to do would be to think with all of you on the question of data, of information broadly. How do we understand our society from different methodological vantage points? Now, our own work with State of Working India, as Nayan said, has been mostly in the economics theoretically and method-wise, mostly disciplinarily, it's in economics. But we have tried, whatever little we could to bring in a more interdisciplinary perspective, even in the reports. And in fact, Nayan was, one of the people who contributed a working paper to our very first report in 2018 that he was mentioning, which was on his work on the the Maruti, broadly the automotive sector. And it was a very good ethnography of factories and factory life and so forth. So we have tried to bring those perspectives in as well in our reports where we could. So let me share my screen, and I have a few slides, not many, around this question of data. And hopefully, there'll be something in it for a few different people, and then I'll be happy to take questions. Our reports, I should say, are all available online. There are 4 reports that we have come out with so far, and they are all on our website. If you Google Center for Sustainable Employment, Azim Premji University, you will get the reports. Okay. So the title was a nice one. I didn't come up with this title. Nayan and the team over there did. Coincidentally, I teach a course occasionally at Azim Premji University, which is called How India Works, Earns, and Spends. So closely linked to this, which is a kind of introductory course on employment and incomes and consumption, etc. in India. Anyway, so to jump into it, let me start with some context. First thing to say, of course, is that we continue to be a low middle income country, which means that our public data infrastructure, the official statistics and so forth, cannot be straightforwardly compared to that of economies several times richer than us. This seems like an obvious thing. Why should one even say this? But there are many times in media and public discourse where comparisons are brought in from EU or US kind of context, and said, well, they have this kind of information, why don't we have it? They have this kind of data, why don't we have it? And the simple thing is that it's the wrong comparison to make. We are not at that level of income, and we cannot be expected to have that infrastructure. We cannot expect the same accuracy, precision, or quality of data, really, I would say. And to give you an example, if you ask yourself, what are the confidence bands around GDP growth estimates that we come out with on a quarterly basis or an annual basis? And you realize pretty soon, if you look at the work of Rajeshwari Sen Gupta and others, that the confidence bands are very large. So if I give you a point estimate and say that the growth was at 6% annual, then 6% plus or minus what? And typically it can be as large as 1 or 2 percentage points, and often minus more than plus, given the political nature of GDP. But anyway, the point is that that is not the point estimate is not a precise one, and therefore are debates over less than a percentage point variation useful? When we have news channels who go over, did the economy grow at 6.2% or 6.6%? That's not a meaningful debate to have, given the state of the statistics. So these are important questions, and they constrain the kinds of debates that we can legitimately have. So needless to say, in media, we don't pay attention to niceties like this. Now, having said all this, it is also true that we have access to much better technology of data management, data collection, management, distribution than today's rich countries had when they were at our level of per capita income. So we are not, we are definitely better off than they were. And plus, public expectations from official statistics are also much higher today than in the past. The public expects the government to have numbers on jobs, on nutrition, on any number of development outcomes. There are expectations from the public that have grown over time, and in a democracy, that's reasonable to expect that there will be such expectations. And finally, our large size, by which I mean the absolute size of the Indian economy, does have some advantages of scale when it comes to government spending on statistics. And that is perhaps one reason why India has been one of the low middle income countries with, arguably one of the best statistical systems for many decades. But again, there's a flip side to this, which is that we have a highly heterogeneous economy. And national means and averages are not useful guides to policy making. So I will keep coming back to this point. I don't need to belabor that point with this audience, because many of you are already very comfortable with the need for getting fairly granular in understanding what is going on. High level numbers are not very useful. Okay, so I will come back to this. Now, the center over there, ideas does a lot with mixed methods and so on. And I just thought that it would be, worth emphasizing that really, for understanding complex social reality, mixed methods is really the only pragmatic way. It's not a choice, or it ought not to be a choice. That's what we should be doing by default. And this typology that I have here, pardon me for the slightly clumsy graphic. The cartoon, by the way, anytime you're giving a talk on data, there's so many cartoons that one almost has to, use them. There's no choice. So I found a few interesting ones along the way. The 2x2 kind of framework that you see on the right, that's not something new. It's just to anchor all of our thoughts. We know this already, that one can think of types of information that we gather broadly in terms of the type of information. Is it quantitative? Is it qualitative? And I've given a few different methods below it, which again will be very familiar to this audience, what those methods are under the qualitative and the quantitative. So we have a kind of a spectrum of these type of methods. And then we have a spectrum, which is about, what is the kind of representativeness of these methods. So, is it a random sampling? Is it purposive sampling? And so on. Now, oftentimes we tend to associate qualitative work with purposive, non-random sampling, and therefore the criticism usually is that it's not representative in some larger sense of some unit, while we associate quantitative data with representativeness and random sampling. But the way I put it, it's clear that these are actually different dimensions. One can have quantitative studies that are not random sample studies. They are purposively sampled for whatever purpose specific to the study. And administrative data, in fact, is an example in my list of quantitative data, which is not usually representative in the true statistical sense. It is a selected data set, and I will talk more about that later. Similarly, qualitative studies can, in principle, be made statistically representative. This is a sampling question and not a method question. Even though we do usually find that qualitative studies are not designed to be representative of any large unit, that they can be if we want them to be like that. Okay, so this is just a way to lay out the field of what we are talking about. I'm not going to be talking about all of these, but in the questions, maybe we can bring in things as needed. Now, I've made a couple of points here on the top left. There is no substitute for understanding the pros and cons of each type of data and method and using them judiciously. There are no shortcuts where you can dismiss one type of method entirely. That's not a luxury that we have. Okay, so I wanted to speak broadly about these kinds of dimensions when it comes to data that we have used for the report. There's the granularity question, how granular is the data, the frequency of the release of data, the predictability of the release, and so on, which is more about the public information, the public statistics part, and of course the quality part, which is very important, and I'll spend most of my time on that. Now, when we first started making these reports, in fact, we started in an atmosphere of data uncertainty. So we started working on the first State of Working India which came out in 2018. We started work in 2017, and at that time, two interesting things had happened in the public data landscape. Two data controversies, I can say. One was that the consumption expenditure survey, which many of you will recall was the series, the quinquennial series from 11-12. The next one was supposed to be released in 17-18 was the year. It's supposed to be released the following year. That was not released. And there was a lot of controversy over why it was suppressed. Was it related to the fact that it showed a fall in consumption levels? It was leaked to the media, for those who don't know. And that's how we found out that they were showing a fall in consumption. And speculation was that it was not released for that reason. Much more close to our own interest in State of Working India, there was the controversy over the employment statistics. So there the problem was that, again, the quinquennial series, the employment-unemployment surveys, which ended in 2011-12, that was not continued. So when we were working on our first report in 2017, there was no recent employment data. There were some surveys done by the Labor Bureau, which we used, but they were not widely used, but widely known. The unit level data was hard to get. And the PLFS, the Periodic Labor Force Survey, which was the new series of employment surveys, started in 17-18. Survey operations started in 17-18, but it was not released all through 2018 until the general election was over in 2019. And when the data came out, it showed a much higher rate of unemployment compared to the historical unemployment series. And once again, the speculation was it not released because of this, inconvenient numbers? And so some of you may recall that there were some high-profile resignations that happened at the time from the National Statistical Commission over the non-release of the PLFS. So when we were doing work on a report, we didn't have the PLFS and we didn't have any other recent employment data. So it was done in that kind of an atmosphere. And we spoke about this in the report and elsewhere as well. Now, as a side point, I'm not going to go into the details of this. My third sub point on the PLFS point here is that the debate over comparability of older EUS and PLFS, which went on for a while after the PLFS came out in 2018, it really showed a lack of understanding of how surveys work. So there's a lot of confusion created by whether change in sampling methods were sufficient to break the comparability of the series and so on. And I won't get into all of that here because that's not the purpose of this talk. But I just wanted to point out that the changes that did happen between the EUS and the PLFS were not of the kind that would make the surveys not comparable, incomparable. So they remain comparable. As opposed to the new consumption survey, the household consumption expenditure survey, where the changes with respect to the old consumption surveys are significant enough that comparability is no longer possible. And I'm happy to go into what makes comparability possible versus not possible later if there are questions. There were a few other controversies along the way. NFHS 5 had some inconvenient findings with respect to nutrition and anthropometric measures, stunting, wasting, and so forth. And that triggered another important debate that continues over NFHS type survey-based measures of, let's say, nutritional outcomes versus administrative measures. What the government's own administrative data is telling it, for example, collected by Anganwadi workers, ASHA workers, and so on similar outcomes, let's say stunting or wasting. So if you have two differing outcomes, one coming from NFHS, one coming from the administrative data, then which do you believe? And here, the answer is not straightforward because both have their own problems and their strengths. So one has to think through that and understand the specificities before pronouncing a judgment. But we have often been very hasty to rush into judgment. And the census, of course, I don't need to say anything about that. But hopefully, we have turned a page on some of these uncertainties and lack of predictabilities. And there have been some recent improvements. So I wanted to also emphasize that the PLFS, the Periodic Labor Force Survey, has been released on a reliable calendar now. And our reports have consistently been based since after the first report. All the other reports have been able to draw on PLFS as the main source of employment statistics in the country. And it has over time improved in terms of the reliability of the release calendar and the time to release also. So if you look at the report that comes out, the urban quarterly report, it's usually released about 1.5 months after the quarter ends. So February 2025, we saw the release for the October to December 2024 quarter. And the unit level data also comes out 2 times a year. It comes out for the survey year in October and for the calendar year in April. So the unit level data for calendar year 2024 was released in April 25. Again, not at all bad kind of a lag given where we used to be in the old days where the data used to come 1 or 2 years down the line. And interestingly, PLFS has been showing some fairly bad news for a long time now, for many years since the pandemic. It continues to show structural retrogression, by which I mean that employment in agriculture has been growing and not declining post-pandemic. Very weak earnings growth, wage growth has been practically stagnant, and that is a contrast to both the GDP numbers and the profit numbers and so forth. But there has been no interference with the release of the data. Even though the data is not showing convenient things. And MOSPI has been actively making improvements to survey design as well. They are trying to build in district level representativeness in the PLFS and other surveys. I will come back to this in a little while. And then there are a few other newer annual surveys of which I spoke about. One, Household Consumption Expenditure Survey. The annual survey of unincorporated enterprises, also an important new survey that has been started in 2021. It's an annual incarnation of an earlier quinquennial survey and very important for GDP statistics and so on because it gives us productivity numbers for the informal sector. Okay, so these are all interesting new developments that have happened in the official statistics. Now, the one huge lacuna, despite all of these improvements, is the issue of granularity, what is the level at which we have good, reliable, predictable data. And this is really, in my estimate, really the key task for the next decade is how can we build a data architecture that is national in scope and at least district level in its representativeness. And that's not a very easy thing to do. As I said earlier, India has been a leader in some ways in public data infrastructure, but most of this capacity is at the central level. Right? There are the state level statistical apparatus lags far behind the central apparatus. And this is important because we have huge regional divergences. The map is By the way, I'm not making any substantive point with the map. The map is just an example that if you look at, let's say, something like women's employment, and this map is showing you how many women work in paid employment, in wage work, for every 100 men. Okay, that is the statistics that's showing you at the district level, and it's from the economic census of 2013. You will see that district level variation is very large, from a low of 6 women per 100 men to a high of 50 women per 100 men. So this kind of a large district level variation, and sometimes there is substantial variation within a state also. You'll see Karnataka, for example, shows a very clear divide between north and south, and other states also have similar features. Tells you that you need those statistics at that level, because meaningful analysis cannot be done at large levels. Okay, so we do have some data at state level, some little data at district level. If you go further down to towns and cities, there's practically nothing available in the public domain. That's again a very big lacuna, because economic geography work has shown that really one of the most important determinants of your life outcomes are the immediate area in which you live, or which you belong to. Right. So migration aside, I mean, that's precisely why people migrate, that my sub-district may actually determine my life chances because of access to education, health, and many other things. So we know that this economic geography is very important, but we don't have the information to tackle it in any systematic, large way. So state level statistical capacities are the key here. Notice that state level information is not what state governments need. Right? When Karnataka government is making policy, it doesn't want to know what the statistics are for Karnataka. That's for the government of India, it's useful. But Karnataka needs good district or taluk level information. In this respect, I should give a shout out to Jindal's new Center for Haryana Studies that I saw in the Ideas newsletter, and that kind of thing is an excellent initiative for state level focused research, and hopefully one can see many of this. But also it has to become a part of public infrastructure, data infrastructure. Okay. All right. So moving on, I'm touching on these dimensions just as a briefly. I realize that there may be many things to say, and I'm happy to come back to any of the points. All right. One thing here, the audience here may not particularly be interested in this, but I do speak to audiences who are more into, let's say, macroeconomic analysis and so on, for whom frequency of data matters a lot. Right? How fast frequency is the data? And the question I'm asking here is faster always better? And needless to say, the way I've asked it, I mean to suggest no. There is increasing demand for latest data on all economic indicators. We all want to know, what happened yesterday on something. But there are important trade-offs between frequency, granularity, and quality, given budget constraints. Right? So if you are doing frequent surveys like PLFS, then doing them at the district level becomes very hard, which is precisely why when MOSPI moved from the quinquennial NSS employment surveys to the PLFS, the casualty was district level statistics. They had to throw that away because they were doing it annually and they didn't have the resources to survey every district every year. You see, so these are all the kinds of things that come up, but also not all economic variables change meaningfully at a very fast frequency. So do we need monthly unemployment rate estimates in India? I don't think so. I don't know particularly what would be gained by getting monthly unemployment, because unemployment fluctuations in India are not like that. It's not the kind of developed countries cyclical unemployment, which really tells you a lot about the business cycle. It's much more structural in nature, and it varies slowly over months and years. So we don't need monthly data for everything. Quarterly may be enough, even annual may be enough, or once in a few years may be enough too. It depends on which kind of indicator we are talking about. Right? I would say broadly annual is a good frequency to shoot for. Now, there is a slightly different issue here, which is not frequency, but the lag of the data. And a problem that we've often had in the public system is that the data is annual, but it doesn't come out very soon after the survey is conducted. And a good example of that is annual survey of industries, where it's annual, as the name suggests, but typically the survey comes out 1.5 years after the end of the survey year. Right? So that's too long to be useful for much policy decision. So for example, if you wanted to do a study on the production linked incentive scheme and say, okay, RPLI is working or not, ASI would be an obvious source to look at. But by the time ASI data would be available and you could do the study, there would be, 2 years might have elapsed since that data. And that's a huge time in policy making. So it's good for research. It tells you something historically what happened. It's not useless, but it's not particularly useful for policy. All right. Yeah. So let me move on. Let me spend some more time on the quality issue. Okay? And here, I want to start with our sample surveys, which have always been, the kind of the gold standard in some ways of a lot of our policy discussions and public debate and so forth. And these stratified multi-state sample surveys of the kind of NFHS or the NSS consumption surveys or any number of NSSO surveys, PLFS, all of these are basically stratified multi-state sample surveys. They are the gold standard in economies like India because we don't have sampling frames, right? Most of these surveys depend on area sampling frames, which is how you do it if you don't have a list of households or a list of firms to which you can administer the survey. There have been discussions in recent times on whether we can use voter lists or other kinds of lists to do random sample surveys. And some smaller survey organizations have tried out various kinds of methods, grid-based sampling used in Google Maps, voter lists, other kinds of things. That can be done. It's cheaper, but it's not as good in terms of coverage. Voter lists are faulty. People are not there. People are not where they are listed. All kinds of things like that. So the way NSSO does it, which is that it visits the selected area a few days before the survey and lists all the households or lists all the firms and then makes a sample out of that. That still remains the best way to do it in a environment like India where registered registries are not very easy to come by. Lists are not very easy to come by. Okay? But there's a problem. These surveys are good, solid method. They're time tested, but they most likely underestimate income and consumption levels as well as levels of inequality because of obvious problems of coverage at the top of the distribution. This is a well-known problem. There's undercoverage, which means you cannot reach rich households. There's non-response, which means even if you were to reach them and solicit you ask for an interview, you might be denied the interview, or specific items like income, etc., may not be answered. They may be underreported. All these problems exist, because of which the top part of the income distribution generally is missing. Now, question you might ask is, what part is that? How much is missing? Is 5% missing? 10% missing? Only 1% missing? That's important because everything else that you might want to understand about the economy depends on this missingness of the top. Right? So I will elaborate on this in the next slide in just a bit, taking the example of income. So it's important for us to know this. It's important to know whether the problem has been growing over time or being solved over time, etc. And there are solutions to this. It's a well-studied problem internationally. So there are within survey ways of doing it, understanding what is missing and what is not missing. And of course, you can compare it with other data sets, which is the most popular method, adopted by people like Thomas Piketty and others, who have also worked on India using the same approach, which is you bring in tax data and combine it and look at it. Of course, Indian tax data is not as good as developed country tax data, but it has been done. So here's an example of that. Again, the picture is just for illustration purposes. I'm not getting into the details of the picture. I'll come to it in a few minutes. But staying with the example of income and the problem of gathering information, right? Income is a notoriously hard thing to measure. People may not want to, for very good reasons, divulge their actual incomes. And yet we do need it for all kinds of economic analysis. Of course, traditionally, many of you would know that income was just not measured. The understanding was that consumption is what we should measure. We should not even try to measure income because it's too difficult, and we'll get garbage numbers. So let's stick to consumption. Let's ask detailed questions on consumption, and that will be good enough for us for living standards. There's still a case to be made for that. But for better or for worse, we have moved now to asking income questions in many surveys. IHDS asks questions, CMIE, Consumer Pyramids, has an income module, PLFS has an income question as well for whatever it's worth. So, income data exists. Okay? And if you look at the PLFS income data, it's of course from employment, labor earnings only. This is not other kinds of earnings, only labor earnings. I have put here a few benchmark sort of comparisons between PLFS and the income tax data to give you a sense of what I mean by the missingness problem. Okay? So if you look at the year 22-23 and you look at the PLFS data on regular wage workers, then you will get the average monthly wage or salary to be 20,000 rupees a month. Okay? If you look at the IT income tax data, for those who reported an income, the answer is 77,000 rupees a month, the average monthly wage. If you look at the zero income filers, a lot of people have report zero income. Now, if you assume the lowest level of income in the IT brackets, that is 7,000 per month for them, then of course the average will come down to about 43,000 per month. That's still twice the PLFS average. Okay, so it shows you that the PLFS is possibly getting at workers that are not anywhere in the IT space. That's the selection problem for administrative data. But it's also possible that at the top level, PLFS doesn't have the income earners that IT captures, that income tax captures. So we have both kinds of problems. We have the lower end missing in the income tax data and the upper end possibly missing in the PLFS data. And for the upper end, I'm showing you the next bullet point, which is if you look at the top incomes, right? What level of income places an individual in the top 10% of the wage distribution? For PLFS, if you earn more than 40,000 rupees a month, you are in the top 10% as far as the survey goes. Okay. For income tax, that's 1 lakh per month. Again, more than twice. Okay. So this is an indication that at the top in the PLFS, a lot of people are not there who do file income tax and would be captured in the income tax distribution. Now, there is some, as I said, Piketty and his colleagues, Naveen Bharti's paper is an example of this, have done this kind of combining to estimate inequality, etc. More work can be done on this. And this is not just about inequality or income measurements. There are other implications which I have put here. So what is India's employment structure, or what is India's female LFPR can actually get affected by this too, right? And that's why my picture is here. This picture is just from our report. I won't go into the details of it. It's showing you the probability of a woman being employed conditional on her husband's earnings. Okay? And there's a well-reported U-shaped relationship between husband's earnings and women's employment that I don't have time to go into here. But what I want to point out with the picture is if you're missing a lot of people at the top, at the right of this here, right? And if you notice that the work curve starts going up, that means women tend to work more in the richer households. And if those richer households are not there in your data, then you're not capturing those women who work in those households. And that has immediate implications for your LFPR as well. So this is, overall statistics of employment structure of the LFPR, all of this can get biased depending on how much you're missing at the top. I'm not saying, by the way, that the PLFS misses a huge amount. I haven't done the work to show you how much it misses. This is just a way for us to start thinking about this problem. All right. There's been a lot of fights in the Indian public data ecosystem over the issue of administrative data versus survey data. Government has been coming out with these documents on data and how to handle it and so forth, big data, how do we use it, etc. Now, are these fights useful? Right? And what do I mean by the fights? Remember, I mean my example of the NFHS and the administrative data on nutrition. You get these two numbers. They tell you very different things about the incidence of malnutrition, let's say, in a particular district. Okay. Now, which one do you believe? Now, in the kind of highly politicized and polarized environment that we have now had in this country for the past 10 years or so, the casualty has been reasoned debate. Because people are used to taking such strong anti or pro-government stances in the current environment, we gravitate towards whatever suits our preconceived notion. So if NFHS is showing high levels of malnutrition and we are anti-government, well, then NFHS must be right and the admin data must be fudged or wrong. And the other way around, if you're a pro-government person, then surveys are not to be trusted, etc. Now, that's obviously detrimental to actually understanding what is going on. There are pros and cons in both ways, and we need to understand them. Administrative data does have some advantages. It can be, first of all, it's usually free and public, although it may not be easily usable always. It's potentially fast frequency, although again, how often it is updated varies a lot depending on the capacity of the government departments. It shows actual outcomes as opposed to self-reported numbers in surveys. This is an important difference often. And it's very granular. Typically, it's available down to district or even sub-district levels. For example, the Antyodaya data is available down to the Gram Panchayat level. So these are some of the advantages of administrative data. Of course, there are disadvantages. It's only as good as the administrative machinery in terms of updates and quality. It's prone to manipulation, and we've seen this example of Manrega many times, where repeated audits have shown that there is a underreporting of work demand under the program. There's selection bias. I gave the example of IT. Only certain kinds of people will be found in the data. EPFO is another example. Why should EPFO not be used to draw conclusions about job creation in India? It should not be used because it is an administrative data set that tells you what you need to know about the EPFO universe, but says nothing about the universe outside of the world outside it. Right? So, if jobs are created which have provident fund in them, EPFO will record them. But other jobs being created elsewhere or destroyed elsewhere, EPFO doesn't say anything about it. So it's a selected sample and it has to be evaluated carefully on that basis. Not that it's impossible to do. We have selection models, we have good tools in statistics to understand selection bias. They just need to be used. All right. So this is now, I'm coming to the end, just the last couple of slides. The question of data quality in India, it's a big challenge and has to be addressed on multiple fronts. We need quantitative data sets of the kinds that I've been speaking mostly about, but we need qualitative data as well. And I'll come in a minute to why I haven't spoken much about qualitative yet. I'll do that in a bit. We need large scale and small scale surveys, and we need survey and administrative data. It's not productive to say admin good, survey bad, admin bad, survey good, quant good, qual bad, quant bad, qual good. These are not helpful positions to take. I mean, I may be preaching to the choir here. I'm not saying that the audience here is doing it, but this is not uncommon in the Indian public sphere. Okay. So yeah, so there are exclusion problems, as I said, not only missing rich, but also missing poor. So you have to think about that. Surveys will continue to remain important in India. It's wishful thinking to say that we can move to an administrative data world where surveys will not be needed. That's just not possible in a highly informal economy. However, administrative data, as I said, is improving over time, can be used. It can be perhaps used internally inside the government for verifying information too, because the more you cross-link PAN, Aadhaar, and tax data and so forth, the more you're building up a richer understanding of the population. Of course, it's legitimate here to be concerned about the surveillance state and what the government can do with this kind of information. And privacy concerns are very important here. So I don't have the time to go into those, but I'm happy to discuss in the discussion. On the last point, on the qualitative data, and this is here also civil society organizations come in a big way, that without strengthening state and local governments as well as civil society organizations to gather information, we are really not going to make progress at the quality and the granularity questions. It's not a problem that can be solved sitting in Delhi. It's just not possible. We don't have the money to do it. And neither is a centralized approach desirable in a large and diverse country. Some states are taking the lead. For example, Tamil Nadu has its own national state level panel survey that the MIDS runs, and other states may be doing similar things. So we need a combination of these surveys. We need a combination of methods, and here the most important thing, when I have done my own qualitative work, my PhD dissertation was almost entirely qualitative, ethnography and interviews and so on. The central thing there was that I could not claim representativeness. It was not a random sample. That was the shortcoming. But the kinds of insights I got on mechanism and agency of people, right? We're talking about people taking decisions, understanding why they make certain decisions, what are the constraints that they face, and the mechanisms by which certain outcomes happen. That's not very, very hard to do with quantitative data and numbers, almost impossible to do it. You need qualitative data for such things. So that's where the sort of happy marriage, so to speak, can happen, where you can bring in representativeness and large data power together with the insights from qualitative data. And that's, of course, what mixed methods is all about. A final pointer on this is that accurate answers will be rare. Precise and accurate answers will be even rarer. And we need to be comfortable with ranges and bounds, okay? And not sort of hanker after precise point estimates. Okay, last thing on causal inference, because this is such a huge thing in policy and in economics, I thought I'll spend at least a minute on it before I run out of time. Then is it okay to take a couple of minutes? How am I doing?
Yes, yes, please go ahead.
Okay, I'll be done in just 2 minutes. Right. So yeah, many of you here would know that economics as a discipline went through something called the credibility revolution over the last 2 decades. The symbol of which is the Nobel Prize given to Abhijit Banerjee, Esther Duflo, and Michael Kremer a few years ago. This whole approach comes from a desire to attribute social effects to specific causes, usually policy causes. So the questions you ask are something like, does fortified rice improve nutritional outcomes? Does a wage subsidy to employers increase employment? Now, these are good questions. The government has an ELI scheme. It gives wage subsidy to employers. We would like to know, does that help create jobs? That question is not easy to answer. We can't answer it by looking at statistical correlations between two variables, right? We can't just look at who got ELI and, did they create jobs and did these two move together? Because there are so many problems of selection bias, which firms got it, which industries got it, is there reverse causality, all kinds of things. Will you pardon me a minute? It started raining and my clothes are outside. I just need to tell someone to pick them up.
Okay.
Just give me a second. So sorry. Okay. Yeah, so there are problems of selection bias, which usually prevent us from making causal claims on many of these policy interventions. So economists have developed a whole range of these techniques, of which RCT is one. And that has become the gold standard and so forth. Everybody knows that. Now, the good thing is that despite all the hype around RCTs and causal inference broadly, and it's impossible to get a paper published in a mainstream economics journal now if your study is not causal. And if you look at our reports, they are all entirely non-causal, right? It's all just descriptive work, as they say. Despite the hegemony, so to speak, intellectual hegemony of causal inference and RCTs, actual design and formulation of public policy act still remains more like an art than a science. And there are many people on this audience probably who would know that how governments formulate policy, how they implement it, it's actually not very observant of the rules that economists would like. So take a standard example. If you're rolling out a policy, you should do it in a way that evaluation is possible, right? So you should do it randomly, do it in phases, so that you can see what's happening before you do it completely. Almost never happens. Governments announce things, they just happen, and then we have to see, okay, what is the best we can do to look at the impacts of that policy, given that causal studies are not possible. Now, is that a good thing, bad thing? That depends on who you ask. I would say, and this is my very last point, that the pragmatic approach here is to combine as many types of information as we can get our hands on, qualitative, quantitative, as I said, all kinds of methods, and then allow the policy practitioners or development practitioners, whoever we are talking about, who are actually acting on the information and the data, to attach weights, if you will, quote unquote weights, meaning how seriously do I take the information that I am seeing in front of me, right? Has it been produced in a way that I feel comfortable with? That's really the kind of thing that you're looking at. And that's what my advisor used to call, I'm sure it's a common enough term, call a bullshit detector, right? That's what you're developing as a student. You're developing an intuition, is okay, does this pass the smell test, right? And these are the only cartoons that I will talk about briefly. The one on the left, you will see the guy saying, I've stopped looking for work, which I believe helps the economics numbers. It's a joke to do with how unemployment is measured. And the fact that if you're not looking for work, then you're not unemployed. And if you don't know this, then you're going to misinterpret the unemployment data. The one on the top there, according to the data, that idea will never work. What data? Anecdotes we've been telling ourselves for years. Sometimes we get very comfortable with our own lens, anecdotal lens to the world, and forget that it's not representative. It's a selected sample. It's not useless, but it often cannot be. Well, it cannot be extended beyond it, the anecdotal universe. And then the last one is for many people who get very enthusiastic about big data all the time. Let's solve this problem by using big data. None of us have the slightest idea what to do with it, right? There are buzzwords that come about in the data universe every so often, and people start using it without really understanding its limitations. I will stop here. Apologies for going over time.
It's totally fine. Abhishek, would you want to go after this?
I'll just stop sharing my slides.
See Abhishek. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Basudev, for this amazing talk. My name is Avishek Konad. I teach economics at Jindal. And when Nayan and I, we were discussing, what you're going to present. So one of the things that we had in mind, and this is a question that I've had, for a long time, which is that how do you look at data? Meaning that from our economics lens and standpoint, one of the things that economics always tells us is that, this is a science, this is a scientific discipline, meaning that we have no preconceived ideas, ideology, or we are not bringing any kind of politics. And even if there are some theoretical traditions within economics which does so, certainly not us who are looking at data. And I've always had the suspicion, and now we have the advantage of having you who've, worked with so much data for such a long period of time that we can now meaningfully sort of pose this question and pick your brain on this. So, what we've noticed, I've noticed in economics is that what you see, there is an incredible amount of fetish with statistical techniques, which is that the main thing that we are interested in is finding out, oh, there is an endogeneity and how am I going to establish causality? And sometimes it is actually very important. There is no doubt. And one of the great things that really has come out from neoclassical economics is, I think, the development of statistical techniques. Much of the others is, I think, not that helpful. But the suspicion has always been that even the best of such analysis, what it is doing is obfuscating or hiding overtly ideological or political assumptions that the researcher either has overtly or just fails to understand that you're making such an assumption implicitly by carrying out this analysis. I just want to say this. So everything I'm going to say is really pertaining to the last slide that you've presented. So for example, it will never talk about social structures. It will never going to talk about any kind of questions of power. Take for instance the classical example, which is most labor economics studies will start with, which also is a slightly misnomer. So when students in economics take labor economics, at least when I did, I was disappointed because the ideas and notions of labor that I had absolutely nothing to do with what we studied for the rest of the semester. In any case, one of the things that we will study is that that there is a causal relationship with college education and wage levels. And so the whole your focus is actually trying to understand the honing the statistical technique, which is going to show us that this is indeed the case. Makes sense, and it's very important and useful for policy. However, this is a very technical sort of it's a technical enterprise, and what it does is completely says absolutely nothing about the social structure which allows some people to have college education and others not to, which is something that your report does an amazing job, which is at every point, even though it's descriptive data and people may not lot of economists may not attribute that kind of importance to that data, it clearly tells you that your location in the social structure allows you to have one or not the other. So that's important. And then the other thing is that the outcome variable, which is wages, there is an impact of education on wages, but it's like a passive variable that agents have no control. You were talking about the agency, which we get, as you were saying, in ethnography and data collection, you find out. So one of the other things that we know and learn from outside of economics is that the biggest thing that contributes towards higher or lower wages is class struggle. Or if you do not want Marxist verbiage, maybe collective bargaining, that workers would realize that we cannot have that kind of impact. Individually trying to negotiate with workers, we are going to band together, and it takes different way, shape, or form depending on the historical circumstances. Completely missing, and you will typically not get any of this from this analysis. So it seems that there is politics, but what it does is it hides or naturalizes the politics. So for example, the other example that comes to mind is, let's say, you look at, for example, even the way people look at labor, which is neoclassical economics. What they do is that they'll simply look at the production, not as a labor process, but it's a production function where everything is an input which goes into the production of a commodity. So labor is the input, raw materials, capital, or whatever else you want to use. These are all inputs, and they are all equivalent, except we have a suspicion that probably this is not the case. How is it that me, the worker, has exactly the same status as the hammer which I'm using? So a very interesting thing that Anwar Sheikh says, which is that this is not a wrong view. This is just a view. This is a correct view, but this is one of the many other possible views. So for example, the other view that we can take is that it's a labor process, where we view labor as the animating agent of the production process, but everything else helping labor in carrying out production. And he says that the fact that we look at production function is a correct view, but it's the owner's view. And it's the owner's view because it's actually only the owner, the only social agent, who can look upon the hammer and the worker as exactly equivalents because they are both costs. Neither the policymaker nor the laborer who's actually engaged, or in any kind of researcher who's interested in understanding social relations, we cannot look at this simply as a production process where the hammer and the worker are actually equivalent. So we have to have. So I think even though we are looking at it as a mathematical and sometimes statistical techniques, what it does is it hides the politics where even if it's unstated, then it hides. So yeah, and in this, so G.A. Cohen uses another example, which is that imagine that we are all going to a picnic, and he says that what happens, it's not unreasonable to think that that we are all inputs in what is the final outcome, which is picnic, and that makes sense. It's not wrong. Somebody from Mars will say that the individuals who went to picnic and carried the food and the tiffin box and the badminton racket, these are all different inputs. But for us, it might be a meaningless exercise. You think that why would you actually make an analysis where we are all equivalent inputs? So that is to say, it's not so much that neoclassical economics or the statistical analysis is incorrect, and it actually has an incredible power, but even in the way we wield and make use of this tool hides political assumptions or hides inherent biases that we have. Um, and the other thing, the last thing really that I have to say on this, which is that depending on how we frame questions, we are either able to ask a certain kinds of questions or have different points of views for the exact same question that is asked. So, for example, in neoclassical economics, even though it's understood that the policymaker is going to be the state, and it's almost commonsensical when it is said in neoclassical economics that free market means that absence of the state, that there should be no state intervention, the state should step back. But actually, there is no theorization or any kind of understanding exactly what object the state is. What are the origins of the state? What are the broad functions in terms of society apart from administrative functions, which is almost a commonsensical thing? What exactly is the state? What are its theoretical basis and functions? You are not even able to pose this question, because the moment you pose this question, you have to really step out and say, now we are talking about politics. Something that actually has been now forgotten, but in an earlier generation before ours. So Kaletsky's famous article, that the political aspects of full employment, that full employment and the question of wage is not simply a technical one. If it were, we would have solved it by now. It's a completely political issue, as much as it is a technical issue. So what we would like to do is, spend maybe the last half an hour that we have picking your brain, because what you've worked for a long time with various kinds of data, and also it seems you've worked with not just economists but also with ethnographers, journalists, and other people who come from different kinds of vantage points and look at this data. So what are the challenges that you face, and how do you, whether you agree partly, completely with what I've said, and how do you sort of navigate this terrain and use descriptive data, which is sometimes used pejoratively, to better understand or have a better sense of society than some of the causal analysis that sometimes neoclassical economics gives us. Thank you so much again for that amazing talk.
Thank you, Abhishek. What we will do is we will take 3-4 questions if there are any at this point, because other than economists, we also have a lot of other people, sociologists, historians. I see Prabhu also here. And so, yeah, I mean, if there are other questions, we will take them along, and then maybe Amit can respond. You can also write in the chat box, and I hope everybody is able to speak now. I tried unmuting everyone.
Can I raise a question, please?
Yes, please go ahead.
My name is Indira Hirve, and I'm surprised, first of all, to see that when you are talking about how India works and lives, you are not using the new conceptual framework of work, which has been given by ILO in 2013. I think, how come that you don't want to refer to it at all? The concept of work has changed. The categories of work has changed. Its implications have changed, and everything is so different if you take up that framework. And I don't know why you all have ignored that framework totally. I'll just give you one example, that now work is any activity performed by persons in producing goods or providing services for their own use or for others' use. This is the broad definition of work. Your definition of work is entirely different. Now, if you are not willing to discuss ILO in this kind of a thing, then it's a different thing. But I would like to tell you that unless you see work in totality, unless you know what work is going on in the economy, including unpaid service, etc., of women, then your discussion will be very, very partial. And let me add that in 2015, 25 end, the Statistical Commission, UN Statistical Commission, is introducing new conceptual framework of not only work, but new GDP concept of GDP, which takes care of this, and new concept of UN SNE, that is United Nations System of National Accounts.
Thank you, Indira. If there are anybody else, and if you would like to introduce them. Yeah.
So I am Prabhu Mahapatra. I'm a historian and labor historian. I have two questions, two issues which I broadly would like Amit to at least throw some light on. One, how does, and I think Abhijit also mentioned it, but I want to just frame it like this. And Professor Hirve also has mentioned it. What is the problem with the data that we're discussing, which is about work, wages, and things like that? How does these data capture relationship? They are numbers, but the numbers are, we are supposed to see them as a direct index of something. But if that something is a thing or a relationship, is it an entity or is it a relationship between entities? How does data, like the way it is conceptualized in this form, how does it reflect or how can we capture relationship? Now, the point is we are deriving from the data or the number a kind of understanding of the relationship. Let us say if there is a distortion already present in not capturing that relationship in the data, any form of reverse engineering to say what that relationship would be, I think would be difficult. Just to give one simple example, like when I started working or looking at this, I thought from the census onwards, from the 1881 census onwards, at least they had the who are the workers, who are subsidiary workers, and so they had categories like landlords, rentiers, and all. Now, in our all these labor force survey, workforce survey, everyone is a worker. Everyone who produces good is a worker. That means the capitalist is also a worker. So is the unemployed guy. He's also, but not unemployed. Let's say anyone who produces, as Indra Hirve said, any goods, or he may be just sitting and speculating and sitting. He's still working because he's producing some goods. But that is so different from what I had at least understood about. Like I really find it workforce, our workforce, are we or labor force? But it makes no distinction between owners of capital and owners and those who don't have. And yet we have a large data. Is there a problem there, Amit, if we cannot capture relationships in the data and try to reverse engineer? Is there a problem in that? This is a very broad question asking. I still use the data and I marvel at the way you have also used the data and to write those brilliant report. And second, just a simple clarification. Amit, is it possible that your center hasn't published the latest? The last report is from 2023 only, We haven't got the 2024 report. I was wondering if you, what is it that, where is it coming out, or do you have any plans of bringing it out now? Okay.
Maybe we take the last question. I saw Manika raise her hand. Two panelists raised their hand. Manika, you want to go first?
Hi, Amit. Thank you for this presentation. And it was heartening actually to see a lot of these. I mean, often as a PhD student and later even starting out with doing your own sort of research projects, we often stumble into these things. With training in economics, you stumble into actually each of these things. That mixed methods may be the way to go because the quantitative stories and capturing everything that's happening, which could be the granular bit in some senses. I mean, the cues for that are hidden or laden in the qualitative sort of information that's there. I just wanted to stress on, I think a lot of other points have been made, especially regarding the relationship that Prabhu just made. But you said that there is a need to also create qualitative data sets. So in your own work at CSE, have you been able to sort of weld the quantitative sort of bits with this qualitative data set? Because often, having been disillusioned by economics when I have landed up in either gender or feminist sort of conferences or forums, I realize that they often criticize me for just throwing in gender and stirring my regression equation and saying that I'm not recognizing the epistemic sort of different standpoints that are there behind these methodologies. I myself agree that maybe being pragmatic about these things is the way to go. But I was wondering from your own work at CSE if it's been possible for you to actually showcase this welding that happens across.
I think we will take just last two more and then, or do you want to go already, Amit?
If there's room for maybe me to come in and then take more, because I'll start forgetting things.
Okay.
It's too much. Quickly, I will just respond so that people don't feel like I willfully left what they said.
There's Ashita and Shamindra. We will come back later. Amit, please, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So first with Abhishek's remarks, yeah, I mean, entirely in agreement for the most part. And this wasn't a talk on economics and its ideological underpinnings and so on. So that might take us too far. But yes, I mean, I would say that the only saving grace is what I said towards the end of my talk, which is that if you're not interested in climbing the economics professional ladder, then you don't need to worry about causal stuff. Most people don't. The rest of the world carries on with descriptive data. Policymakers do. All kinds of people are happy with descriptive. You show a time trend and you make a causal claim and you move on, nobody will blink. That's the reality of the world. Now, if that makes you mad, okay. If that's good and you're like happy, this is how the world should be, time trend should be shown and causal claim should be made, great, because that's where the world is. Right? So I feel like if your battle is with the economic discipline and its commanding heights and its ivory tower, that's a different issue. And that's a good battle to pick. I mean, I think we are due for a reset anyway. I think it's gone on far enough and there will be some reset. This is how academic fashions work. But I'm not overly worried because out in the world, there are plenty of people who are willing to listen to descriptive work. I'm not dismissing the concern by any means. I'm just pointing this. But there's much more to say there. Maybe we can do that offline in terms of ideology. Anwar Sheikh, of course, is right. I mean, there's, the reason economics is so resilient and popular and so on is because it serves capital and it always has. Now, I will say one thing though, and this is an important thing to, I think, notice, is that the methodological conservatism of economics is much stronger in my estimate than its substantive conservatism, by which I mean what questions can be posed. You can pose a question of class exploitation and revolution as long as it is methodologically conservative, meaning that it is statistical, causal, all of that. So, I will refer to another Nobel Prize, the Acemoglu Prize. What is that? I often joke to my students that thankfully, finally, a Marxist economist got a Nobel Prize. It just had to be Darren Acemoglu. What is it doing except what has already been said in much more sophisticated ways, but casting it in a methodologically conservative fashion, which is acceptable. Now, you can say that that does violence to all kinds of things that were there earlier, right? Of course it does. But it also shows that if you speak the correct language, you can say a lot of things in economics. And there are people who've made careers out of this. I know people with left-wing sympathies in the US who played the game, right? And they rose the ranks. And some of you may know some of these people who work on labor and so forth. They are all fairly to the left in some broad sense. They're not revolutionaries, of course, but they played the game. They did what they could in the confines and broadened the discipline. They cannot break the methodological conservatism. That's a much stronger one. Anyway, that's all I'll say on that. On Indiraji's point, yeah, so, the talk wasn't about those definitional issues. I was sort of just putting all of that in the back and just focusing on types of information and data. But what is work? How are we defining it? How has it changed? Are our statistical systems consistent with, ILO's changing norms, with SNA? I think these are all very important questions when it comes to both doing justice to the world of work in its own terms and cross-country comparability, etc. as well. So some of you may be aware that there is an ongoing debate on India conforming to the new norms or ILO norms, on work, what it is and so forth. And as far as I know, MOSPI has continued to have its own frames, including what it counts as employment, what type of work doesn't qualify as employment. It has continued to stick to its annual recall periods, even though ILO has moved to weekly quite a while back. I'm not really an expert in many of these definitional issues, but I wouldn't dismiss them. I mean, I think they are important ones to consider. Just that today's talk, I was not really focusing on those. Okay, on Prabhu's issues of relationship, here I guess I would say, I mean, I think mixed methods really again is the way to go if you're interested in these issues. So let's work with the example of capital labor relationship. Okay? Now you raise the question, what do these numbers do? Do they tell us things? Do they tell us relationships? Now, of course, the answer is it's both, depending on which kind of number you're looking for. Right? If you look at the employment categories in PLFS, and this relates to your other question also, where are the capitalists in PLFS? Well, they are all in code 1.2. Code 12 is capitalists. Right? Code 1.1 is own account workers. Code 1.2 is capitalists or employers, as they are called. Code 2.1 is unpaid family workers. 3.1 is regular workers. If you look at the category 3.1, that's regular wage workers. That's obviously a capital wage relationship. It's a thing in the data, but it is a proxy for a social relationship, which is the capital labor relation. So if you're doing work using this data to say, is India capitalist? Well, the rule of thumb should be status 31 has to be more than 50% of the workforce. Now, that's my very deliberately light way of, because I see Nayan over here smiling. There are decades of debates over what is the mode of production, right? Well, the mode of production debate, as far as the PLFS goes, is measures category 31 and see what is happening. Now, jokes apart, that is not enough, obviously. So you are going to have to combine it with something else. Now, the obvious question that arises is, actually, an interesting one here is, what is casual wage work? Again, that's a very easy to understand category, we all move on, casual work. But it turns out to be a surprisingly hard thing to do. You need a lot of good qualitative ethnographic understanding to see what do people mean when they say casual wage work. Is this the capitalist economy? What kind of an employment is it? Is it the surplus labor sector in a Lewisian sense? It's all of the above, because it's a complicated category to get your head around. So if you're serious about these relationships, then you definitely need to go beyond the labor force survey numbers, which are just the starting point. And you're going to have to look at what the actual conditions prevailing are. And the numbers will not do justice to that. The best you can do is, do you get PF, do you get paid leave, and whatever things which all of us are familiar with, but they don't get to the heart of Prabhu's question. But that I wouldn't claim that makes it useless. It is what it is. It's a statistician's approach to a complex social reality. I'll give you another example. NFHS has all kinds of questions on gender relations. Now, how seriously do you take those questions? How often do you get beaten? Do you have to take permissions of various people to go? We have all used those questions at face value. Now, I'm sure there are people in the audience, gender studies people, ethnographers, who will say all of these are highly problematic things to ask in a survey. Are you getting real answers or not? It's not clear at all. But there do exist this survey information, and you can get some gender relation information from there. I would not say that if you're a serious scholar of gender relations, you should stop with the NFHS statistics on domestic violence. You shouldn't. You should look at other methods. You should see what else is going on. I'll give you a very good example from a recent student thesis. It was, she went to a village and she wanted to find gender oppression, and she did. the faculty member asked her, how many of the women that you spoke to had a secret mobile phone that they didn't tell you about? And she said, oh, I didn't ask them that, right? Now, a good ethnographer knows that it is like that cartoon, the New Yorker cartoon, no, where the tribals are in their hut hiding their TV and their mixer grinder and saying, quick, the anthropologists are coming. So we all know that people perform, and we all know that people reserve agency. Why should they tell you everything in their life? And this is something I tell all my students when we train them on survey methods. When people come and ask you a question, do you always give them the truth? No, you don't. Why do you expect people to do it? They will guard their life spirit and agency. They will hide their mobile phones. They will hide the ways that make them operate in the world. Now, where do you get all this? Not from surveys, but you will get it from other places. You get it from just being a participant in life. Anyway, I'm preaching to the choir. But lastly, on qualitative in CSE, sadly, we have not been able to do as much as we wanted to, and the reason is we are all economists. So our natural habitat is numbers. But one thing that we did realize that we really needed was when we look at women's participation in the workforce and all of these kinds of things that Indiraji was also raising, a huge issue is knowing what women do, how they spend their time, how they move between these categories, statistical categories, unpaid work, subsistence work, employment, all of this. It's very hard to do without good qualitative data. The other important thing is constraints to women's participation in work. Why are they not doing work outside the home? What holds them back? We don't get it from surveys. Sorry, did I interrupt someone? So anyway, but to finish, I think those are all good reasons where we would want to do more qualitative work than we've done.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
What I would like to say is that I'm not talking about qualitative data and qualitative economics. I'm talking about a new setup of economics, new heterodox economics, what we call, where we have clear data, clear understanding of what is work, how it is determined, and so on and so forth. So when you are used to limited definition of economics and your concepts and everything is the way you have described, that's fine. But there is something which is new, which is coming up to take the place of this, or to add into that, not take the place, but to add into that. And that part needs to be known because it's a systematic part based on quantitative parameters.
Yeah, agree.
Are there any other questions? I've seen Ashita, but I think she's left. Shamindra, you want to? Yeah.
Hi. Thank you, Professor Basole. This is great. Always a pleasure listening to you, deconstructing everything. I'm Shomindra, I teach here at Ideas. I was just wondering that whether you are working now this whole idea of the changing nature of work. And by changing nature of work, I would like to emphasize a little bit on the question of going back this there is a dynamic change, at least in the urban setup, in terms of how labor, nature, and contracts has been defined lately. We have platform work, we have work that has been done in remote capacity, etc. And unfortunately, our surveys are not adapting enough. Labor force surveys are not adapting enough to answer those questions or even provide us a useful estimate for that kind of workforce, which is a very important part of the economy and part on the interesting repercussions of women's work as well. So my question broadly is what kind of framework beyond the surveys can be useful? Like, is there any alternative way to look at them? The second question is broadly around skills, and PLFS collects a lot of data on skills, and I'm sure that you know that if you go to the CAMS survey, which is recently came out, you see that there's extreme variability of skills across the board. I was thinking that what is a good conceptual framework also to link the question of skills to the job market question. And this is coming from a lot of the background from, how do we look at our occupations from a skilling point of view? I mean, the NCO 2015 codes, not much different than the before, but how do we pick up questions like soft skills? How do we pick up questions like, social interaction, all these different kinds of things, and also experiential skills? We have to define work perspective and which contributes to the demand of work. And also, like, how on a policy standpoint, why this is important, because we need to really have a good idea that what kind of labor pool we are adding, not only because of what's going on, but also from the perspective of international migration, labor's going out. Say, what is a plumber in India may not be considered as a plumber in Japan, may doing a different work. So all of these debates that are going around that we should have labor exchanges, people should go to those countries, work and come back, Land Pritchett, etc., who are preaching on that. So that's why we need a more integrative way to define the skill pattern of a workforce. I was wondering that if you have anything to suggest, or you are working on that, anything, great. Thank you very much.
Are there, we can take maybe one more if there are any, or if somebody wants a follow-up question. Otherwise, I think Amit, you can just take this and.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good. Both are good questions. Also, just very quickly on the skills, I'll come back to skills, but we are, and this answers Prabhu's question, who I think might have just left, that the next report is coming out later this year, and there's a focus on youth and also skills in that. So we will be looking at a little bit of that. But to go back to your questions, so platform and remote work, yeah, I mean, this is, one of those things that journalists keep hounding us, right, about information. And I keep telling them, I just don't know enough about the world. We don't collect that kind of information. So we don't know even basic things like how many are there, what counts as gig work. We need to do a lot of work on just conceptualizing it and so forth. I think all of that, it's high time was done properly. I think Government of India might also be doing some. I don't want to speak out of turn and say they're not doing anything. They are quite focused on the gig economy. So I'm sure they're doing work on conceptualizing it. There are also talk of surveys specifically designed to look at it and so forth. From a research point of view, I would say that, of course, there are people who are doing their own surveys, quite a few, but many more can be done in this space. Both qualitative, quantitative work, I think, needs to be done to understand the economy much better. The question is, how much is it? I mean, is it a large phenomenon that's become a first order concern under our noses without us having the information? Or does it remain, so I would say anything less than, 1 to 2% of the workforce, I would say is okay, let's not worry about it too much, right? So what order are we talking? I'd like to know. I mean, 1% of the workforce is a very large number in India, so I don't want to. That's tens of millions of workers. But in a relative sense, you see what I mean. However, I would not contest the fact that we do need to do a lot more work on understanding it systematically, and we haven't done that. We, by we, I mean neither at CSE nor by and large, I think all of us. On the second question, I think that's a bit more, I think, closer to my heart also is a skills question. So all the points you raise are very good. We have been very bad traditionally in accounting for skills in our surveys. They've never really captured it. Those questions don't seem to work. And one reason has always been that formal vocational training, etc., anyway, have always accounted for a tiny fraction. Most skill acquisition is informal in nature, and we don't know how to really either capture it, measure it, certify it. There's a whole range of things. Now, RPL has existed for a while, and people like Santosh Mehrotra and so on have been writing for many years on recognition of prior learning, how it has been used in other places, how India can use it. And I guess that is the closest when it comes to the standard, official systems of skills. RPL seems to be the nearest concept to gather up a lot of what we know actually happens in the Indian economy, which is that jobs teach you skills. Skills don't get you jobs. Okay? And repeatedly, this comes out in many conversations, including with employers, interestingly, when they are in the mood to admit it. I mean, when they are talking to government, they are complaining that the Indian worker is not skilled. But then most of the time, they are hiring and skilling people. So what is actually an aggregate demand deficiency shows up as a skill deficit, in a funny way. Because if the economy is booming, no employer is skill constrained magically. When the economy is not booming, there are skill deficits all over. So we have to kind of first get it right. What is it that we are looking for when we are trying to skill people? And when we are not skilling them, how are they getting skilled? And how do we enable that visibility? I think that is the big question. And for international interoperability also, that is the thing. If we have a good, we have amazingly skilled people in India, but they have nothing to show for it, as you very well know. And with students, I repeatedly emphasize this point, that you कहीं अभी I don't know बनारस वगैरह से कोई है कि नहीं उस साइड में कहीं भी गुलाब जामुन और समोसा खाओ, you tell me what is this quality. You will not find it anywhere, right? You cannot do it in Bangalore unless you get the guy. Right now, what has he done? He has just learned how to do something, but we have no way of quantifying it, no way of really talking about it in any sensible way. So we continue to, as relatively rich Indians, enjoy immense skill privileges without any skill premium going to the people who are giving us the skill output, and that continues to be the joys of living in India. If you're a rich person. But policy-wise, we have to think about it. We're just not, there. I agree entirely. I have no solutions.
Just to add, I mean, sorry, Nan, and sorry, Professor. This the skill question also like intrigues me at a lot, because I don't know if you know, like some of the state governments are looking at the European exercises of doing a farm to skill mapping, where like I was doing some work with AP some time ago, and the industry department wants to do a farm, and they also do want an employment survey to map skills between them. But I don't know how such framework would work when skills been learning, and we have seen it in kind of pandemic where there's a sudden urge of government, well, so many people got unemployed, let's skill them up, and they say like we are all skilled by our life through this. It's not a certificate based story at all. One question that I wanted to ask you, I forgot last time, was this linking of administrative data, etc. There's a lot of efforts going on in the government. Like you probably know, recently MOLE has pulling up all the BOCW boards data to make a unified labor portal. There's eShram already. But when you triangulate them with labor survey, they are not like each. So there is always a bias of self-reporting that is there in case of administrative data. The sample survey data is also self-reported. The person is reporting, but to somehow the quality of the survey and the quality of enumeration been able to control that non-sample error. But on the other hand, a census like this, which like I still is census because every people want a card and everyone's applying at that level, putting up self-report is, and it gets. So what do you think that this deficiency of administrative data sets where it's totally driven by the question of I'm getting benefit, that's why I have to report and I'm making a database. And our statistical system, unfortunately, is moving to that direction. Those data sets been made a gold standard. They can be gold standard, but that needs a verification and bit of a controlling. So when we talk about like vetting the sample data with admin data, how do you counter this kind of issues? That's the question I have to ask. Sorry for this last moment.
So we are already kind of out of time, but if there is somebody else, we can still take one more and then I think call it a day. If there is nothing else, then Amit, please go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else. So on this, yeah, I mean, what is concerning to me, probably also to you, is sometimes there's this casual talk in government documents of, the survey ke din to gaye, ab to, admin data ke din aa gaye type, which is worrying for all the reasons that you just said. I guess, I mean, I find it difficult to think about it in general terms. Perhaps maybe with a specific example, we can think through it. And the eShram, EPFO, that whole kind of way of thinking, maybe that's a useful thing that we are building up, over the last 10 years or so, maybe less actually, last 5 years, we have built up these portals. Now they are self-driven or have other kinds of selection issues, so they cannot be used to make general points. But the limited question I would have is, are we doing enough in the space of those things to ensure that we are taking care of basic hygiene stuff? Deduplication or spurious entries not being there, etc. If one can be convinced that the administrative data, and that's why I get the MGNREGA example, that if you can be convinced that this is a genuine reflection of whatever it is, then it's a reflection of that selected reality. And you can work with it. You can bring in other data and so forth. But if there are doubts about the institutional frame in which the data is generated, why it is being generated, and the target seeking mode of, oftentimes government is in that thing. So the bureaucratic way of using data is pushing numbers on number of cards issued, number of people listed, without any regard to what happened after that. That's not useful. And PLI is actually a good example of this, that you ask anyone a simple question, all of this was announced, it is done, what happened? And we don't know, right? Because we don't know which sectors to look at. The sectors in which the scheme maps are not the sectors in which the NIC system works. So you can't match it very well. All kinds of problems in matching that, even if you had the administrative data. So we are very far, I think, from a place where we can really triangulate very well. The best we can do is probably audits of the kind that we do, and keep doing those and say, look, this is what Ishram has said. We have done this surveys. Here's the discrepancy, and etc. And again, Manrega is where we have done it. So I have the first-hand experience there. It is possible to locate people from the portal, go and interview them. So as long as this is possible, I mean, there are privacy issues here, but you can do it if you want to do it. That's how we build up a better understanding. The government doesn't seem to be in a frame of mind to really acknowledge it, and say, because it's so defensive. I think that mode has become defensive, and so any survey that paints you in a bad light just automatically has to be rubbished and so forth, which is not helping. But yeah, anyway.
Okay, thank you, Amit.